something amazing. And this is amazing. We just thank you for the blessing that you've poured on Carol and and Terry, just the rejoicing that he feels also that his wife has been cured, and we just want to rejoice in that. But we don't want to also forget about the folks that we do still need to pray for, like Willeen and John's mom and the clothing industry that's coming up this week. That there's just still so much going on, and though we are rejoicing, we still know that there are those who are grieving over the loss of someone they love. And so let us be rejoicing, but let us also be attentive to those who still need your tender care, your touch. And we just turn them over to you. You are a diligent God. You don't overlook anything. And we praise you for that. And it's in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ of Nazareth, we pray all these things. Amen. So last week we started with a package of M&Ms. And we talked about how this M&M package really kind of reflects something. When we make a purchase, we don't buy M&Ms for the package, we buy M&Ms for what's on the inside. But the M&Ms on the inside is what we are after. We don't really care too much about the packaging other than to remind us how good M&Ms are on the inside. And we went to that great quote from Buckminster Fuller. I'm not getting anything, Jeff. There we go. That says that 99% of who we are is unseen, and yet we obsess about the 1% that is seen. We pay so much attention to our hair and our clothing and our teeth and how we're doing things on the outside, but we don't pay that much attention to what's going on the inside. And Jesus tells us, no, that's not the way things work in my kingdom. In my kingdom, things are completely different. In my kingdom, there is a different order, a different way of doing things. And we went to Mark the 10th chapter, and we pulled this verse out to remind us what the first step of being a Jesus follower is. And it says here, so Jesus called them together and said, you know that the rulers of this world lord it over people, and officials flaunt their authority over those under them. But he says in verse 43, but among you it will be different. So my first question this morning is it different? Are we different? Do we have a different set of rules than those of the world? Are we going by a different set of standards? Because Jesus lays out the standard for us in the next verse, and he says this, whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first among you must be the slave of everyone else. And that is so different than what we've been taught in the world. Everything in the world has always been about leadership, leadership, leadership. Everything is leadership. We need new leadership, leadership, leadership. Jesus says, no, no, no. I'm the leader. You be followers of me. Don't worry about leadership. There is only one head of the church, and it is Jesus Christ. Everyone else is a follower. And the first order of a follower is this. Whoever wants to be first among you must be a slave or servant of everyone else. That is the world turned on its head. Because everywhere we turn, it's about leadership. But Jesus says in this church, it's going to be different. In this church, in this organization, it's going to be about servant. Who is going to be a servant? That's what it's about. And so Paul reminds us of this fact when we go into Philippians, the 2nd chapter. He says, you must have the same attitude of that of Jesus Christ. That He was God, but He did not think of equality with God as something to cling to grasp, to hold on to. Instead, he says, He gave up His divine privileges and took on the humble position as a slave, as a servant, and was born as a human being. And we talked about what that word servant means. Servant means doulos. And we said that devoted to one another to the disregard of one's own interests is the definition of a servant. Remember now, this is the vision of the church. This is what Jesus had in mind when he said to Peter and James, come follow me. What he was saying was, I want you to be a servant and serve other peoples. And let me show you what I mean by that. And that's where we're coming to today. Throughout Jesus' life, he showed over and over again how to be a servant. Because that is the central function of the church, is to be a follower of Jesus. And the first order of being a follower of Jesus is to be a servant like he was. So as we move forward, let's go on to where we dropped off last week. We are in the book of John. And this is what it says. Before the Passover celebration, Jesus knew that his hour had come to leave this world and return to his Father. He had loved his disciples during his ministry on earth, and now he loved them to the very end. Here is Jesus, hours before he faces Pilate and Caiaphas. And before, just hours before that first flog comes down on his back. Hours just before the first strike to his face. Just a few hours before the first Roman soldier spit on him. He was that close. And even though he was that close, what is he doing? He's loving his disciples one more time. You see, Jesus as a servant, he's not servant when he feels like it. He's servant all of the time. In trial, in trouble, in persecution, when things are good, he's a servant. When he's facing the hour, the purpose for which he came to earth, he's still serving others. And he demonstrates how to be a servant at this time. Let's continue on. Verse 2. It was time for supper, and the devil had already prompted Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had given him authority over everything and that he had come from God and would return to God. So Jesus knew what was going on. He knew that this is why he had come here. And yet, in spite of all of that, what does he do? So he got up from the table, took off of his robe or his coat, wrapped a towel around his waist, poured water into a basin. Then he began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel he had around him. Folks, please understand, this was not just a quickie. It was not just, hey, put your foot in this water, we're done, we're moving on. He took the time with every individual foot, every individual toe, and he washed it and he dried it. And you know who else's foot he washed and dried? Judas. The one who was going to betray him and hand him over, he washed his feet too. Would we do that? We get upset about somebody who said something to us 15 years ago. We're still holding a grudge about somebody who rolled their eyes at us 18 years ago. We remember that time 10 years ago when we walked into church and someone gave us the cold shoulder. Jesus is washing the feet of the disciple, and in just a couple of hours is going to hand him over to be brutally executed. And Jesus knows full well who it is, and he knows full well what this man is going to do, and yet he washes his feet. Because Jesus has the heart of a servant. What can we learn from that? He goes on. After washing their feet, he put on his robe again, and he sat down, and he said, "Do you understand what I was doing? You call me teacher and Lord, and you're right, because that's what I am." But then he goes on to say, "And since I, your Lord and your teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash each other's feet. I have given you an example to follow. Do as I have done to you. I tell you the truth. Slaves are not greater than their master, nor is a messenger more important than the one who sends the message. Now that you know these things, God will bless you for doing them. You see, folks, if I could just pour my heart out for you this morning and just tell you what I think. The problem with churches today in America is this right here. We exalt leaders. We exalt evangelists. We exalt people. And we put them in positions they have absolutely no business being in. You turn on the television and here's some televangelist that people throng out. That's not Jesus. That's not what He set up. Jesus did not set up a church so that some whirlwind preacher comes in and saves the day. He set up the church that says, I am the head of the church. Me, Jesus. Everyone else is a follower. And everyone else in the church, here's how I want you to behave. You serve one another. The guy who stands on this stage is not to be the one who is served. He is to be the servant. Our elders are to be servants. Our teachers are to be servants. Our Sunday school teachers are to be servants. Our custodians are to be servants. We are to serve each other because that's the heart of the gospel. We serve one another because that is the example that Jesus gave for us. I am so tired of preacher worship. I'm so tired of the church looking for the next great leader instead of looking for the great next follower. We send people to seminars how you can be great leaders. But we don't send people to seminars how you can be great followers. And that is so upside down and so backwards. That is not the church that Jesus founded. Be an example of a servant, because that's the example we need to follow. Jesus says, now you do these things and God will bless you for doing them. Folks, when you serve each other, that's the key to a great church. That's the kind of church God blesses. The kind of church that God wants First Christian Church of Dyer to be today, tomorrow, next month, next year, is a church where people serve each other. Let's go on and look at more examples of Jesus serving. He says this. By this time, this is from the book of Luke, the 24th chapter. This is on the road to Emmaus. After Jesus is resurrected. And by the way, before we go into Jesus being resurrected, Jesus was looking after His people before His persecution, before He was put on the cross. And while He was on the cross, what did He say? Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing. He's still serving people, even while He's hanging on the cross. And then after He comes down from the cross, He resurrects from the dead, He's still serving people. By this time they're near Emmaus, and the end of their journey, and Jesus acted as if He was going to go on. But they begged Him. I love that. Jesus said, all right, guys, we'll see you later. Oh, no, come with us, come with us. But they begged Him, stay the night with us, since it was getting late. So He went home with them, and as He sat down to eat, He took the bread and blessed it. And then what did Jesus do? He broke it, and He gave it to them. You see, I think Jesus was kind of walking around with His hands in His pocket. And while He was talking to these guys on the road to Emmaus, I think He kind of hid His identity by just kind of keeping His hands inside of His pocket. And then when He blessed the bread and He broke it, they saw the nail-pierced hands and they said, it's Jesus! And what was Jesus doing? He was serving them again. Here's the resurrected Lord serving people with His own hands. And He doesn't, that's not the only time He does it. Let's go on to the book of John. The very first chapter, the very last chapter of the book of John. John chapter 21. We find Jesus once again serving. It says this. Later, Jesus appeared again to the disciples beside the Sea of Galilee. This is how it happened, he says. John says. Several of the disciples were there, Simon Peter and Thomas, nicknamed the twin, and notice he's back in the fold now, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two other disciples. Simon and Peter said, "You know what, boys? I'm going fishing." "We'll come too," they said. So they all went out to the boat, and they caught nothing all night. Sounds vaguely familiar, doesn't it? At dawn, by the way, Wayne's supposed to be this great fisherman. I got blanked, I went with that guy. Got nothing. He didn't get a nibble.
I had my helper with me. He didn't do any good either.
Hey, by the way, I did get my fishing license yesterday. So. At dawn, Jesus was standing on the beach. But the disciples couldn't see who he was. So he called out, "Hey boys, have you caught any fish?" "No," they replied. Then he said, "I tell you what, throw your net on the right side of the boat, and then you'll get some." "Ah, sure." So they did. And they couldn't haul in the net because there were so many fish in it. Oh man, I love this story. Then the disciple Jesus loved said to Peter, "It's the Lord." We've seen this before. Remember one time when we were back in the beginning and Jesus told us to throw the net on the other side and we caught all these fish? They'd seen this before. Simon Peter heard it was the Lord. He put on his tunic where he had stripped from work, He jumped out of the boat and he headed to shore. The others stayed in the boat and pulled the loaded net to the shore, for they were about 100 yards from the shore. When they got there, listen to this. Pay close attention to this. When they got there, they found breakfast waiting for them. How beautiful is this? The resurrected Lord. "Hey boys, you caught anything?" "No." "Try the other side." And he's snickering, going down, getting the fish ready. And they freak out. Peter jumps out of the boat. And as they get to the shore, breakfast is there. Jesus didn't say to them, "Hey boys, why don't you make me a little breakfast? I don't feel up to it today. I just resurrected here a few days ago. And why don't you serve me?" This is the resurrected Lord serving one more time the disciples. But he doesn't stop there. He says, fish cooking over a charcoal fire and some bread. And listen to what he says in verse 10. "Bring some of the fish you've just caught." You notice he didn't take credit for that? He told the boys to cast it out on the other side. He made that miracle happen, but he didn't take any credit for it. He said, "Hey, take some of that fish you've caught." What an example for us. How about if we take less credit for the things that we do and give credit to other people for the things that they have done? Isn't that a great place to start? As a servant, the servant's heart is, I'm going to look out for the interests of someone else, not my own interest. So if somebody has done something, I'm going to give them credit for it. Even though maybe I did it, I'm still going to give them credit for it. Jesus says, take some of the fish you've caught. So Simon went over and dragged the net ashore. There were 153 fish, and the net had been torn. And then the story goes on from there. Come and have some breakfast, he says. And then Jesus served them the bread and the fish. It wasn't enough that he made breakfast for them. The resurrected Lord, the King of all creation, everything has been put under his feet. There is nothing that has any authority over Jesus. He has complete authority over everything except the Father. Everything is under his feet. And he comes over and he serves fish and bread to his people. He serves them. Because that's who he is. He can't help himself. That's his nature. That's who he has always been. He has been this servant. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I wanted to gather you like a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you wouldn't let me. That's who he